Welcome, everybody. We are getting ready to start projects your students will never forget from the North Carolina Summit in Charlotte, North Carolina. Big woohoo for Charlotte, North Carolina. Cool. Loads and mountains of cool people in here. And we hope that there are folks that are going to enjoy the recording of this as well. So with that, let me switch over to our slides. And boom. And that's exciting. Boom. And there we go. So with that, projects your students will never forget. Welcome, everybody. My name is Rushton Hurley. I am a former high school teacher. How many of you are high school teachers? Excellent. How many of you are high school language teachers? Yeah. How many of you are high school Japanese language teachers? Bummer. It's always just me. All right. Anyway, that's what I used to do. Good fun. And I was a principal of a K-12 and then an online high school. And then I started my own little nonprofit. So working on that. Okay, Wendy. Oh, all right. 1 minute. There we go. And I hope that you have joined the chat. The chat is set up so that we can share ideas. And when we think about using a chat, sometimes people think, oh, you know, that's like just the perfect distraction is what the chat is, and it could be. But if you start a chat with students and give them the chance to just kind of send out some quick hellos, everybody throw out a hello to the room. You know, that can kind of get it out of their system a bit. Because what you want to do is get them in a space where even the quiet ones who might be, you know, a little nervous about speaking up in front of a larger group have an opportunity to share their ideas. That's what we really want to do is kind of be in that space where students feel like they can take the insights that are in their head and get them out there. We'll talk about this in more detail in tomorrow's keynote, but the real power here is getting the chance to bring more students into the conversation. Additionally, there is the benefit of being able to share links. So like you saw before the session got started, I've got a couple of links there that you can use in order to find, you know, different kinds of tools and all. If you are watching this recording and today's meet has expired, then you can use the information that will be at the end of the session in order to contact me and get it. So you will be able to get there. All right. So my little nonprofit is Next Vista for Learning. It's an online video library by and for teachers and students around the world. And the idea, it's a free little tool. The idea is to be able to share insights on creative approaches to learning anything. And so we have material about different ways of learning different topics and different subjects. We also have things about different places around the world, about service to others. And if anything you see in there is of interest to you, feel free to connect with me and we'll explore projects if that's something you want to do. Now, if you have not already done so, you need to learn the name of someone whom you do not already know. So look around, find somebody you don't know and learn their name. Go. If you are watching the recording of this, feel free to pretend that there is somebody who's new to you, close by, and ask them their name, and let that go from there. Okay, if you can hear me, go shh. If you can hear me, go shh. Cool. All right. So now, in talking about projects and talking about memorable projects, right? I want to take you back to school for a minute. So think back to when you were in school. This might have been quite recently. It might have been a few years ago. All good, right? But when you think back to high school or middle school or elementary school, I want to know if there's something that really stands out in your memory. I don't mean the general things. Like I had this wonderful teacher, she really cared for me. That's a great thing. It's a great thing. But I really want you to think specifically about learning moments. What were those moments that really stood out in terms of learning? An activity that happened in class or something about the way someone taught that really made the learning come alive for you. I'll start by giving you an example from my own experience. In 11th grade, I had Mr. Plyler, a guy who I can tell stories about like all day long. This wonderful chemistry teacher. And one day he walks into class and he says, all right, you're all going to get an egg. and I'm going to give you some material, cardboard and tape, and what you're going to do is build something so that when I throw your egg off of a building, it will survive. And we're like, oh, ooh, right? How many of you have done that project before? A lot of you, because it's a really cool project, right? When you do a really cool project, you share it so others like, oh, we got to do that too. It teaches all kinds of really interesting things. That opportunity to kind of think about, well, how might this work? How would this? I was paired with Paul Putnam, right? A friend of mine. And right at the last minute, he says, oh, we should change this to make it even safer. It had worked every time before. I was like, and then we threw it off and it didn't work and it was kind of a bummer. Anyway, the scars will heal. But when you think about those moments, what's that moment for you? So I want you to talk with the person whose name you learned a moment ago. And we're going to take about 60 seconds to do this, right? And try to describe in your 30 seconds of that 60 seconds what that moment was for you, or a moment was for you that really stands out in your learning. Go. I'm guessing you just heard some cool stuff. How many of you heard something cool just now? How many of you are thinking to yourself, I just said something cool, why don't you have your hand up? Now, so here's what I want you to do. Now try to capture that moment in 140 characters or less and toss it into our chat. Toss it right in there. What is that thing that stands out as an interesting moment of learning for you? Now, if you aren't connected online right now, but the person next to you is, you might ask them to toss something in for you. That's totally fine. What we're going to do is try to capture a lot of different ideas about what really represents, kind of moments of memorable, powerful learning for our students. And I think that as we begin to look at those moments that people think of when they're thinking back to their moments as students themselves, they're going to come up with all kinds of things, right? We reacted war games at the park for 11th grade humanities class. Rock and roll, right? Personal connections, very good. Solar still, how to find water in arid landscapes. Awesome. You can see as these things start to jump in, all kinds of cool ideas begin to come. One of the things we do as teachers is when we're planning activities and lessons, we tend to focus in on, okay, there's just this. There's this thing in my head, right? I want to put this together. And we don't draw enough upon the ideas of others. This is one way of doing it, right? So you start getting different ideas out there, you can start working with them. Now, as you look at these different things that are coming out, I think we can identify some characteristics of them. So when we think about characteristics of really powerful learning, what are some things that leap to mind? Anybody want to just kind of toss something out? This would be a characteristic of something really powerful and memorable. Something unusual. That's actually very important because there's a certain predictability to the school day. So when it kind of breaks that predictability, that's really big. Good. What else? Movement. Being active is important as well. Absolutely. What else? Hands-on. Absolutely. So they're doing something. It's not just a matter of like sitting and getting. We spend an awful lot of time as teachers just saying things that we ask them to listen and then kind of get back to us later. And we can do better, right? Because the kinds of things that we want really have nothing to do with how we present them and everything to do with whether they learn it. So to whatever extent we can say, let's try it this way, let's try it this way, let's try it this way, we can get those kids where they need to be. So I've got 5 characteristics. I think that if we kept going, we'd get more and more, right? But one of them is that we participate actively, one that was just mentioned. Another is that you creatively discover something new. There's a difference between, this is important, remember this, and okay, here's an idea, where can we take it, in order to kind of guide the students to a point where they begin articulating the thing you want them to learn. When that is the case, it is much more memorable for them. That's a much more memorable activity for them. Just like you were saying, leave the realm of the predictable. If what a student has in his or her head when walking into a class is, we're going to do 5 minutes of this and then 10 minutes of pair share and blah, 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 and they just kind of know what's coming, they move into that low gear. So what we want is for them to be able to say, you know, what's coming up? If we can catch them off guard, if we can get them in that space where they're like, ooh, what's about to happen? That's big. Additionally, it is much more memorable when it genuinely pulls some excellence out of them. We have a bit of a problem in our country of doing things like saying, look at you, young man, you breathed out and then breathed in. Well done, all right? And I think that's a shame, right? Because, you know, kids know when they're being praised for not much of anything. And when they know they've really pushed themselves, that's different. So we'll talk about excellence in that sense as well. And finally, a sense of meaningfulness. And this has to do with the purpose of the learning. So for example, if what's happening is they're doing something merely to check off a box for what they're required to do in the classroom, that's very different than if the outcome of the project is something that means something to others. So we'll explore that. So I'm going to leap into this by talking about several sample projects. Get it? Samples? Not too funny. All right, anyway. So sample projects, all of which have to do with video, because that's what I do, right? I don't believe that video is the only way to capture a kid's attention. But I do believe that if you're going to talk about the things that really work for you, you should draw upon, you know, the things that you've experienced that really seem to work. Now, you can adapt these for your purposes however you need. All right? So the first one has to do with that meaningful bit. I want to get into a space where we're talking about getting kids to know that their work makes a difference. And I'm going to show you a video that was put together by some kids just last year. This is called Foster City Little League Challengers Division. All right. There we go. And let's make that big. That'd be big. There we go. And play. So I'm gonna have you share some thoughts on this right when it's done. It's not long. Don't blink. Here we go.
The Foster City Little League Challengers Division is a program that enables all people of all ages with disabilities to play the game of baseball. All people in the league have a disability, which can range from autism to not being able to walk. Even though these people are not as fortunate as others, they are treated with the same respect and have the same desire to play the game of baseball, just like anyone else. The volunteers at this program are there because they love to help others do what they love most. Each game that these kids have a chance to compete in, they are having a blast. Every fan that shows up is there to support these children.
All right, take just a minute and talk to the person next to you about kind of what you saw in that video. Go. All right, now, thinking about it for a minute, you got some ideas back and forth. I'm going to add this wrinkle to the conversation. What was the assignment that led the students to create this video? What was the assignment, or what were the components of the assignment that led to it? Keep talking, go. Toss out a few ideas. What are some of the components of this kind of assignment? Anything that comes to your mind is fine. What do we got?
Service learning.
Service learning. Okay, so it's embedded in some kind of service learning program that may be a part of the way the school works. Absolutely. What else?
I like the student ownership part of it. It was totally student.
Okay, yeah, so student ownership is a part of it. So clearly within this assignment is you go and do.
And tell the world you understand why you're there.
And tell the world you understand why you're there. That's awesome, right? Now, this is part of a project that my nonprofit does annually called Service Via Video. And I'm gonna give you kind of some pieces of how this works. By the way, at the end of this session, I'll give you a link so that you can get to all the slides. So anything that appears in the slides, including, for example, the link to get back to the video, if that's of interest to you, you can get back to. So you can take notes if you want. If the spirit moves you to take notes, that's great. Otherwise, feel free to get the link later. So Service Via Video is built around this idea. Get students to learn about a charity, some nonprofit in their community, the things they do, research them, find out their story, right? And then interview a volunteer so you can get the personal reasons. Why would someone get involved with this? What would they do? I see some of you like, oh, we got that one. We nailed that in the discussion. Exactly, right? Request visuals. This has to do with writing and how registers, kind of work in speech. It's one thing to say, y'all got some visuals, and another thing to say, excuse me, at our school we're doing a project where we're telling the story of charities. We've chosen yours. Would you have some images or footage you can share with us? That's a big step for a lot of kids to learn that they can communicate that way. Because they may not think they can, but it's simply because they haven't tried. And when they try, they're like, oh, I can do that too. And it's one more avenue for getting them to see themselves in a new light, right? They can do things that they haven't done before. Another bit is to get into the process of planning a video, creating a draft, and getting feedback all along the way. To build off of feedback. Anybody in this room who teaches writing knows it's all about revision. Look at what you did. Is it good for the audience? Does it capture people the way it should? Could you use a slightly better word there that would make somebody go, oh, right? Can you get in that space? Revision is everything about taking your work up to the next level, right? And kids seem to do that all the more easily with video because it's fun for them. And hopefully that's a good way of kind of helping them understand revision, kind of a back door to getting them to go, you can do that with your writing, those kinds of moments, all right? So lots and lots of revision. Now, I have a link on this last slide here. It says advice on this project in gory detail. I wrote up like several pages of like how to jump into this if you're interested, so that if you want to do something like this, we'd love to work with you. If your school does projects where kids, are supposed to do kind of service learning projects, and you would be up for them creating videos that can help others, that would be great. We actually give $200 donations to the charities highlighted in the finalist videos. So there's some extra kind of skin in the game, right? And then also the kids kind of figure out along the way that $200 may be nothing next to what that video can do. Because we have charities come back to us and say, can we put that video on our site? Absolutely, we'd love for you to. We'd love for these kids to know that the work they did made a difference for gathering new supporters and new volunteers and things like that. Now, there's some other tools that are in there for you. For example, if you're using images and you need to cite it, I've got a great activity called the 2-slide presentation. That's not a particularly ambiguous title, I know, right? The 2-slide presentation essentially asks kids to get a piece of media, and in this case, a Creative Commons licensed image, to cite it on the first slide, provide a link back to where they got it, and the second slide is just why they chose the image. The idea is to minimize the project down to the point where they don't ignore the citations. So that they learn, oh, there's actually all of these ways out there of getting to Creative Commons licensed images, Creative Commons licensed music. It really is free for me, unlike royalty free. Royalty free means you buy it, then you don't have to cite it. That's not what we want. We want it's free, we're just obligated to cite it, which is what Creative Commons is. Okay, so there's that there for you.
Could you repeat, just real quick, what was that? The first slide was the picture with the citation, and the second one was just why they picked
The description of why you picked it. So it's something you might do at the beginning of the school year, for example, where kids are getting to know each other, and so they're supposed to pick a picture about something that's of interest to them. My family and I, take vacations in the summer, and we went up to New York last year, and I saw all these really interesting things. Okay, great. Anything like that that allows them to just find an image, cite it, and say something about it. So that's it. Because the more involved the project, the more likely they are to just kind of blow off the citation part. Yeah. Right. How many of you are like, oh my God, that's what I live with, right there, right? Okay. Now, if you teach elementary and you're thinking, I don't know that project will work for me, I would contend that it could. And here is an example of a piece done by kindergartners and first graders for our service via video project. Slightly different kind of take on it, but see what you think. Here we go. This is called Heart Houses.
First, you need some glue and some markers to color and glue the pieces together. Okay, so you need shapes and squares and triangles and rectangles. You can glue something on the back to do a pin, ornament, magnet. Sell a hard house for $5 if you want. We're gonna get the money at the superstore, Sandy.
If you like that, give those kids a hand, yeah? Isn't that a fun video? I love that stuff. Now, real quick, could your kids do a video related to a service project or a charity or something like that? Right? Could they do that? Yep. All right. When you think about this, is this something the kids are going to remember? Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. Not simply because it was a really good project, because this teacher, Tricia Fugelstad, who's an amazing teacher, by the way, up in Chicago, she captured it in this video. This is something that becomes part of the story of the class and of the school. When you're sharing with parents what happens with their kids in your classrooms, having something like this where the story is right there is incredibly powerful. And think of the quote she got there as well. Making a difference makes me happy. Oh my goodness, how much better could it be, right? If we can get kids in that kind of space, that's awesome. And then, at another point, one of the kids, says, I feel it in my heart when I make art. How many of you are like, oh, it's a moment, it's a moment. Yeah. Absolutely, right? I mean, these kids are absolutely ready to connect with their learning in ways that allow this to bring what they do to a new level, right? And so let's look at that in a little more detail. So the second example, the second sample project is a project that I'm calling Diving into Discovery, all right? It's a thing that we started last year called the Global GeoVideo Project. And the idea with the GeoVideo Project is that we connect schools and teachers and kids from around the world. We had 16 schools this last year in 9 different countries, Singapore, Taiwan, China, Japan, South Africa, Canada, Mexico, El Salvador, and the United States. And the idea is for them to begin creating things that allow the students in other places to watch them and ask questions. We're trying to build questions, right? So a video project may not be squat for pushing their thinking, but really good questions that are layered into a video project might be very powerful. I'll give you an example of how this works, right? So this is the Sahara, okay? We've got the Sahara. That's the Mojave. They are both deserts, right? So we've got the Sahara Desert, we've got the Mojave Desert. They're both deserts. Are they the same thing? No. How are they different? We're seeing certainly in those pictures that piece, right? And those are the kinds of things we start bringing out. And so then that leads to more questions, right? Well, is it that way everywhere in the Sahara? Is there vegetation everywhere in the Mojave? Right? That can lead to interesting questions. And what you want them to then do is say, how do we find out? What do we explore in order to figure that kind of thing out? Because if you look for the definition of a desert, it'll go something like this. A barren area of land where little or no precipitation falls, making it hard for plant and animal life to thrive, or just something along those lines. And if that's the definition of a desert, what's the biggest desert in the world? Antarctica, right? But we tend to be like, oh, but wait, don't you have to have some sand, right? You know, isn't that the case? Maybe, well, maybe not. Part of what we want them to do in exploring the videos they're going to make about fundamental concepts in geography is really stop and say, do we know what these words mean really? Which is kind of like, I don't know, getting educated, right? You know, kind of that space where you go like, what do I mean when I say that? And so if we have them exploring these terms in ways that allows them to stop and go, okay, so based on that definition, Antarctica is a desert, and a big one, as it turns out. Now, try this out with some teachers. And I asked them in groups to get together. One person created a Google slide presentation, shared it with the other members of the group. There was a slide for each member, and then they were instructed to, each person, you've got your slide, put a geographic fact at the top of the slide. So this was one of them. Great school in Italy, okay? So think for a minute. If you were to ask some follow-up questions to that fact, based on that fact, what would be the next question you'd ask? Okay, real quick with each other, just what would be a question you would ask based on that fact? Go, 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 go. Aye. So I heard one question rise up, which was, why are we not there? You know? Style points. All right, now, so the teachers were asked to come up with questions, right? And they came up with these questions. What else grows in Italy? What products come from grapes? Where else are grapes grown? These are perfectly good questions. However, about 3 minutes into the activity, they'd gone to each other's slides to put these questions down. They'd see what the person did, and write a question, go to the next one, write a question, things like that. So after a few minutes of this, I said, okay, stop. I want you to take a look at the questions that you put on the other slides there, and I want you to ask yourself this. Are they fascinating questions? And the group of teachers I was working with that day looked back at me and said, give us another couple of minutes. And after another couple of minutes, the same group of teachers in the same place doing the same activity came up with these questions. I think you'll agree these are much more interesting questions, right? But let's dive in here. What was the difference? The difference was simply that they were asked to come up with fascinating questions. If all you do is say, give me a question, people will be like, my job is to come up with a question. Question. I've checked off a box. Let's move on with our lives, right? You know, this kind of thing. But if you say, I want a fascinating question, then they're just going to stop thinking, is that fascinating? Is it a fascinating question? They're capable. They are capable. When we ask them, make it cool, right? Can you make it cool? Then they take what they've done and say, well, how do we move that from the I just checked off a box to that's pretty cool? So we want to get into that space. We can do it. Matter of fact, if you're like, that's kind of different than the way I've taught, then with about 10 minutes of trial, you'll be like, oh, cool, I can do this now. That's the thing, right? So much of what represents really cool teaching in the 21st century or whatever term you want to toss on it is just teachers kind of cutting themselves loose a bit. What if this worked? Let's try this. And being comfortable with things like, all right, kids, we just tried this. It totally bombed. But if we were to do it again in the future, how should we change it for your learning so that it would be good, better for your learning? And the kids will come up with ideas. The ideas may not be so hot, but then some kid will say something and you'll go, ooh, there's an idea. And then everybody knows that when you do it next, it's based on Maria's idea, right? And so people are like, oh, Maria, do it. Build on that kind of thing. We're now taking the Maria approach to doing this. Maria's like, that kind of moment, right? Okay. That's another idea. If you're interested in geography projects or something like that, having kids make, videos about fundamental concepts in geography, contact me. I'll give you my contact info at the end. We'll get you involved in this year's iteration of this project. Love to get you involved. The third sample project that we got is built around the idea of focusing on excellence. How do we pursue excellence in their projects? Because a lot of what we do when we ask kids to create is they just kind of create something. Or even worse, their parents create something, right? Definitely not what we're shooting for. What we're shooting for is getting them to take their learning up a notch. If you do an activity and you can say to yourself, these kids took their learning up a notch, that's great. But if you just did a project, then you just did a project. And we want to do better than that. So we're going to look at a video. This is a video that comes out of a project that my nonprofit does 3 times a year. Here's the challenge 3 times a year. Create a video about something one might encounter in school. 90 seconds or less. Explain it in some creative way. You get another 60 seconds for credits if you need. Okay, because they have to use stuff from specific sites. They can't just get anything. Oh, we love this song. I'm glad you love the song. We're not going to post your video. Oh, but there are these other places they can go to get music that is Creative Commons licensed, and they can swap out the music and submit it and be like, all right, good. That's a really good video, right? And later they find out, oh, it was a finalist. Oh, and they have those moments. We all have moments. We don't always talk like this, but you get the idea. All right, so I'm going to show you an example of this. This is one that a teacher and her kids put together in Nebraska, and she has a special talent. Right? We've got several videos from this teacher and her kids. Emily Lindgren is her name, and just see what you think. This one is called Cause and Effect. Here we go.
All over the world, things were happening. People began to wonder, why? Why are all these things happening?
Look in the papers. For some reason, lots of stuff has been happening. Why?
Why, you ask? The cause. The cause why these things are happening. We must find the cause.
All of the stuff that is happening in the world is because of the cause?
That's it. The cause is why something happens, and the effect is all the things that are happening.
Clue words sometimes signal a cause and an effect.
Here we have a child who is shivering in the cold. The effect is what has happened. The student is very cold. The cause was the student forgot to wear a coat.
The student forgot his coat and consequently shivered through recess.
Here we have a piece of burnt toast. The effect is what has happened. The toast is burnt. The cause is left in the toaster for way too long.
The toast is burnt because it was in the toaster for too long.
The cause is the student earned a good grade. The student earned a good grade, and as a result, began to smile. The cause is why something happens, and that is what happens. The cause is why it's happening. The effect is what is happening.
Cool, right? Now you look at something like this and you think, that could take time, but will the kids remember it? Yeah?
Is this using like the trailers on iPad?
So this one was not. The Heart Houses one was, right? I think they might have done it in iMovie and not the iPad, but generally speaking, when I recommend different kind of approaches to making videos, I encourage people not to use the trailers. I think that the Heart Houses is a fantastic example of using it effectively. Most that I have seen don't, right? Because when they're trying to get it into the trailer, they're kind of getting away from the pieces that are important about their learning. And let me speak to that. So hopefully that'll kind of take us to another level as well. When we think about kids making good videos teaching something, consider what's happening for a minute. When you tell a kid, I want you to make a video teaching something, what are they going to do? Well, one kid's going to grab the camera, the other kid's going to stand at the whiteboard, and somebody starts recording and they explain to the whiteboard. Because that's their experience learning. That's what they know. It's a perfectly logical response on their part. What they need is to see what other people have done so they can get other ideas. And once they've got other ideas, then what they need to do is start down the list. Got another list for you. Here we go. This too is in the slide, so you can get it later if you want. Watch what others have done. This allows you to do lots and lots of really good things like ask yourself, what were the strengths? What were the weaknesses? How would we have approached it differently? That's the question that actually gets them in fantastic space for being creative with their projects. What is another way to have got that message across, right? Create a plan and get feedback. The script is actually the key bit. It is the key bit. Most of you are not teaching video production. You're teaching, kind of third grade topics. You're teaching, science, whatever it is you're teaching. But if you get them to give you a script, you can then take a look and tell whether they're meaningfully working with your content or not. What you want to know is that they aren't making terrible mistakes with the content. Because as soon as a kid that gets by you, they have taught themselves that forever. We can say things that we want them to remember, they just can't seem to remember it. We say one thing wrong once, they all remember it forever, right? You know what I'm talking about. So at any rate, get a plan together, get a script together, and get feedback. And then once they've got the script approved through you, let that be the grade. The grade is the script. Then what they do is they draft a video. They know that these videos they make are going to be watched by everyone. That's actually the incentive to make the video, that others will see it. You can add a little more incentive to it. You can say things like, the grade you got for your script, you get to keep if you produce a video. Now, there's lots of other pieces, and I'll hit this in more detail in session 8 tomorrow afternoon about movie projects and iMovie, things like that. But, little things like letting kids work with 1 or 2 other kids. That's fine. As long as those 1 or 2 other kids are willing to work with that kid. Because occasionally they'll be like, I'm going to work with him. And he's like, right, that kind of thing. You can submit it to us. If it meets our rules in terms of, copyright-friendly content and, all this kind of stuff, we'll give you feedback. It's one of the things the teachers like most about our projects is that the kids are getting feedback from someone else. And so if we write the kid, we actually copy the teacher. Hey, nice video. You got some music in it, but I didn't see a credit for that music. Could you add the credit showing that you got it from the right site and then resubmit? And the teacher gets that email and it's like, I told that kid 5 times to put that credit in there, right? So we want the stuff published because we're changing the audience. That's the idea. We change the audience of their work. It's like when we talked about the videos for the charities, right? It's not just the teacher. And that makes a difference in terms of their quality. All right. So I've got some sample videos in the links for you. These are 3 that were put together by, let's see, Movie Tips and Tricks was one that some kids put together or a kid put together in order to give you a way of making your videos better. And he did a great job with it. He had a lot of fun with it. Collecting Like Terms was one a teacher had done. It was the first video this teacher had ever made, right? but it is a really good video. And it is essentially a way of trying to think about like terms in an algebraic sense. And he did a great job with it. Poetic Meter and Rhythm is a clever piece that was done last fall by a student in a class where they were instructed to, that was their semester finishing project, was to make a 90-second video explaining something particularly they'd learned and show that they could bring their insights to it and all. And by the way, with that one, it was made using WeVideo, one of the sponsors of EdTech Team stuff, by the way, and a company I just quite like. They've been really supportive of my nonprofit. And all of our, in every one of our contests, the video that's made using WeVideo, the best one using WeVideo gives them a GoPro camera. Exactly. Pretty cool. All right, so what I was talking about before, right? Strengths, weaknesses, different approaches. If you're really focused on particular videos about the thing you teach, you can add the question, how would we validate the information presented in the video? That can become a really good activity as well. All right, I talked about having the kids watch what other kids have done. Here are 3 sample sets for you. So the first one, the finalists of our contest, we got about 1,600 videos on our site. 200 of them have been finalists, which should suggest to you that we really like celebrating kids' work, right? And so you have kids make videos, if they push themselves, you know, even some, you know, their chances are fairly good, especially depending on when they do it. The service via video submissions, lots of different kind of examples of people doing service stuff. And then the careers collection, I'm quite proud of that. We got just over 100 videos that were built off of this direction to students and teachers. Make a video about a particular career by interviewing someone and ask 4 main questions and whatever else you need. What's your job title? What does a typical day look like? What kind of education or training does it take to get the position? And what do you love about your work? And a lot of kids find this really interesting because they don't imagine that there are so many careers out there. They can name about 6. Oh, this is what my mom does and my dad does, and there's principal and police officer and the president of the United States and NBA player. Did I get them all? You know, that kind of thing, right? And if what happens is they watch a video and they're really inspired, what? Someone gets paid for a living to pilot vehicles underwater for science research? That sounds cool. Yeah, it looks pretty cool, huh? Yeah. Would I have to pay attention in math class? You might, all right? So those kinds of moments are really good for kids to just inspire them to think about these possibilities. All righty. So I have jammed through a lot of ideas, and here's what we're going to do next. I want you to think about the different things that you teach. It may be that you are thinking, okay, there are particularly challenging topics that my students encounter. I want my kids to be able to look at those topics in new ways because I'm tired every year of watching them struggle with this. Maybe I can get kids at some point in the year to make a creative video or 4 explaining this so that multiple presentations of that content will be available for them. I'd like to do something like that. Maybe you're thinking about, here we are about to start the fall term, and the question, as always, is just how much did these kids forget over the summer, right? And I'm going to start them by having them make videos about fundamental concepts that they should have remembered, because that allows us to review them in such a way that we have material that we can refer back to. That's a possibility as well. You might do like the teacher in San Jose did and say, you know, rather than having a final exam, I want my kids to make videos. And I'll talk a little bit more about that project in the keynote tomorrow, because we've got some great examples of that. But lots of possibilities. Take a minute, talk to the person whose name you may not recall at this point, because if you're like me, it's been way too long, right? And it's totally fair for you to turn to that person and say, could you remind me of your name again? Totally fair, right? And then talk about what might you do? What kind of project might you do? Go. If you can hear me, go. Thanks. I'm hoping we just launched the first session with some ideas that you're jazzed about, right? Like the conversations you just had with each other kind of led you to that space where you're like, ooh, I want to try this with the kids. Because we need to do that. We need to be in that space where when we are helping them get ready for something, we're showing the enthusiasm that we want them to bring to it. Because I don't believe it's our job as teachers to entertain kids. I don't believe that's our job. Our job is to inspire and educate. But that said, when we're having fun teaching what we teach, they come along for the ride. They do, right? So we want to share that enthusiasm with them. Now, you may have some questions. I may have good answers to your questions, right? We'll shoot for that. But I also want to get my contact information in front of you as well. Note, for example, also that this has the slides. I'll stick this in the chat so that you can get to it as well. So there's my email address. Feel free to write. I'll write you back eventually, right? Right? There's my Twitter handle. You know, feel free to follow me. If you go to my page, look at my tweets, and I'm worth following. That's what you always do. Look at someone's tweets. What have they talked about? If they're interesting things for you, follow that person. If not, don't bother. There's the video library, all these kind of cool videos that teachers and students around the world have sent us, including the 3 that I showed you. The resources, this is the freebies that I had at the beginning of the chat. So lots and lots of freebies broken into different categories. Digital media, collaboration, subject-specific stuff. There's even one, search and research is another one. But the last one is called Sources of Inspiration, which is a set of links to videos that are out there somewhere on the web that are just really amazing, right? And so if you're kind of looking for something to kind of give you that extra thought, feel free. There's my newsletter. I'm hoping that all of you might be willing to give the newsletter a shot. nextvista.org/newsletter. If you scroll through the chat, you'll find it at the very bottom. I'll stick it again, kind of at the top. And then finally, there we go, tinyurl.com/rh-nc15-projects. Let me grab that shortcut. So rh-nc15-projects. All right, so I'm going back to the chat. Over here, I say slides. Boom. There you go. Right there. And let me also get the newsletter thing there because I just love like having a captive audience, I guess is the way that works. So here we go. So newsletter. Boom. And so these guys are both in the chat. So with that, do you have some questions that I might be able to speak to? This might have to do with how you're trying to make things happen with your particular students and subject and grade level. It might have something to do with equipment. It might have something to do with adapting this for some, in some very different kind of way. So not video, for example. That's totally fine, of course. Any questions that you have? Wave at me if so. Yeah.
How do you make it less singularly specific?
How do you make it less singularly specific?
Because I did a thing last year that took a good bit of time.
Yeah.
I think it was meaningful. But we did epic rap battles of South Carolina history.
Epic rap battles of South Carolina history.
So if you've seen
Cool.
epic rap battles, they did. The kids turned and created an epic rap battle.
Nice.
It was great, but they learned. In a group, 2 kids learned about 2 people within South Carolina history, and they spent probably 2 weeks, 2 to 2.5 weeks completing this project. My issue with that is, at the end of the year, teachers are still held accountable for high stakes past testing.
Yep.
And when you do projects like this, they obviously take a lot of time.
Yep.
But they are usually, in my opinion, singular. Like you have a very, very small topic that you're focusing on, which is great for students, but it doesn't translate into test scores at the end of the year. So
thinking about different projects, thinking about the kind of time they take, the focus that they may experience with that may take the kind of time that takes you away from being able to cover the material that are covered in the tests, that kind of thing, right? All right, so several thoughts on that front. One is that you can expand the projects in some really good ways. One of the best ways to do it is to say, okay, focus on like two people in South Carolina history, and connect them to something else we've studied, not South Carolina. something else you've learned. And so then they have to kind of get those creative pieces going where they're trying to explain different things. The idea here is that the moments that are created are the kind of powerfully memorable moments that actually allow them to more easily remember it. Because one of the things that happens with us in terms of time, and this is real, right? But one of the things that happens to us is we think, well, I've only got so much time to cover this content. We could cover 3 times as much content as we cover now. Kids wouldn't remember any of it, but we could cover it like that. And if that's the reality, that the speed at which we go means that the activities themselves kind of reduce down to here, remember this, here, remember this, here, remember this, then we're not really being effective in terms of their memory, right? So when I think of projects your students will never forget, I'm thinking, okay, to what extent can we make these projects something that allows an efficiency of remembering the content? And that's the hope. That's not an easy thing to do. If it were easy, everybody would be doing it, right? But on the other hand, it's something that people do make happen once they just kind of give it a shot. So I would say that for a lot of what happens in terms of state testing, the stuff that the kids are challenged to remember becomes more easily remembered if they have other ways of referencing the material that was handled. And the connections that happen within the projects can allow that to happen. So that, my thinking is that the more engaging the learning, the tests tend to take care of themselves that way. It's always possible to increase test scores by getting them to really focus very specifically on how a test works. But I don't know that that's why we got into teaching. And I also believe that that the cycle that represents our belief that accountability can actually work that way, right? Kind of we're at a certain peak in that, and we'll get back away from it, and then we'll come back to it, and that's just kind of how it works. So think in terms of, I'm going to make sure that what we do in the classroom is the kind of thing that gives them the opportunity to make a reference to what happened. Truth is that there are a lot of moments we have as teachers where we might say to students, what did we learn yesterday? And they kind of look at us blankly, and then we stop and we go, what did I teach yesterday? Right? No, that's kind of natural enough. And that's what happens when we're really focused on just getting content across. So a bit of rambling on that, but hopefully kind of a useful thought or two in there for you. Cool, thanks. By the way, one other thought there. With a lot of projects, we think in terms of saying, here's the project that you have to do. You can just as easily say, here is the project that you have to do. Here's the default way to do it. But if you want to do it a different way and you get it approved by me, that's okay. That option to change the nature of the assignment can be really big for kids in terms of their being, kind of connected to the topic and how they explore it and things like that. Cool. Other thoughts? Other questions? I'm back. Yes.
What time frame, for your fourth, fifth grade project versus one has a big video, you would incorporate some type of history, writing,
Okay. So the question is about time frame for a video. If you have, how is this different for elementary students versus, say, AP U.S. history kids, or how does time frame work into it? I would say time frame works into it a couple of ways. For one, as a language teacher, I actually didn't have to use much time in class at all, because the kids were just so into making these videos that they were so into those days when we'd watch the videos. Mr. Hurley, we're going to watch the videos on Friday? We're going to watch them on Friday? Yes, we are. And no more chocolatey, sugary cereal for you, right? This kind of thing, right? And so they were really into it. But I would just say, this is something to do outside of class. And if they, I might give them, some time on the front end where they'd work on the script together. But most of the time, what they did was outside of class. I would say that, you think in terms of saying, all right, you're going to have, say, 6 weeks to do this project. But the script is due in 2 weeks. And then that kind of gives them plenty of time. A short time frame in terms of doing it is probably a bad idea in terms of quality. Also, and I can't emphasize this bit enough, this one's big, get ready. Make sure the videos are short. Make sure the videos are short. If you don't give a time limit to the video, they will make some long videos. And the kid's going to walk into class and say, here's my video. And you're like, oh my, this is a 20-minute video. They're like, yeah, I added some action scenes. You're like, you added kung fu to your photosynthesis video? Yeah, I thought everybody'd like it. And so it's going to be brutal to watch. And I'm just saying, limit your exposure, save yourself, right? 60 seconds or less, get them to make their video. And what that does quite beautifully in terms of time frame is it gets them to focus on the key pieces. The shorter the video, often the better they are, because the kids have decided not to include a bunch of stuff that you just don't want to see. Here we are walking down the street with our boba teas. Great, that has nothing to do with elasticity in economics, right? Well, I suppose it could, but only if they were narrating it in some clever way, which they often aren't. All right, so anyway, an important piece there. Do we have other questions? All right, so let me do this. Let me come back to you folks who might be watching the recording of this. All right, so thank you very much for, actually you guys hold on a second. Thank you very much for joining us with this, this project your students will never forget. I hope this is something that teaches you something interesting, and if you ever have any questions, feel free to reach out. Take care, bye-bye.